The quote-unquote game of life. Chapter 13. All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better. Ralph Waldo Emerson. 1. We are in the quote-unquote game of life. In a sense, this mortal life could be compared to a quote-unquote game that was started by our creators, hypothetically. In this quote-unquote game, they gave each of us the exact same amount of money, let's say $1 million, and a time limit in which to spend the money and to interact with each other as we so choose. Each of our choices in how we spend the money will be influenced by our foundationalized, individual, humanity type. Because they didn't set any ground rules for the game, we are compelled to depend upon our own intuition, what feels right, to figure out the rules as we go along. We are given the ability and discretion to set and follow whatever rules we desire. We can also change the rules according to our discretion. More often than not, it isn't long into the game before a very few take all the money from the majority and begin to control not only all of the money, but also all of the rules of the game. When the time limit allowed for us to play the game is up, the advanced humans who prepared the game for us will return and bring with them a copy of the universal rules for the quote-unquote game of life. These are the original rules that have always existed throughout the universe to manage the never-ending quote-unquote game of human existence, as they explain how the quote-unquote game is played by the rules. We will realize that playing by these universal rules creates and maintains equality and peace among us. We will recognize these rules as those that we followed when we once lived in a perfect world as advanced beings. Unfortunately, for the few who have garnered all the money and control over the quote-unquote game, they will realize that the cause of all human misery afflicted during the game was personally caused by them. Had they followed the original rules, they would have never allowed themselves to become unequal to anyone else by taking another's money, which was never theirs in the first place. They will realize that the rules and control that they maintained throughout the quote-unquote game were directly responsible for how it was played. Needless to say, those who make the rules for and control the resources of the imperfect world are responsible for much of the misery experienced in it. If we consider that only about 1% of the humans upon this earth control the rest of the population and most of its assets, we can begin to see the great misappropriation of the earth's resources and the disparate representation of the rule of law that controls human behavior. Consider that currently there are about 7 billion people upon the earth at the writing of this book. This means that 70 million humans benefit disproportionately from the quote-unquote game of life than the other 99%. This is how the quote-unquote game is currently played on our earth. 2. We were created to be equal. We have learned that we were created as equals in all things pertaining to our ability to support our individuality. In other words, each of us in our primordial existence had the same opportunities afforded to us to become who we made the choice to become. The environment there existed to make sure that we had the necessary means to do so, according to our individual desires. In the beginning of our mortal existence upon this earth, our creators placed us in an imperfect world, yet in an environment where we were all equally capable of supporting our individuality. They did this so that we could see for ourselves what happens when free-willed human beings are left uninhibited to their own natures and to make their own decisions in relation to one another. This life became a probative experience, a probationary period, where we are able to see for ourselves what each of us as an individual is capable of doing and will do with our free agency. As explained previously, in our advanced primordial world, we were able to observe what other humans did with their free agency as they went through their second stage of development, mortality, on their quote-unquote Earths. Many of us could not have imagined that we would do the exact same things with our free agency when it came to our time to experience mortality. Even though Stellarian and Lunarian people realized that they would never have power and control over others, let alone the ability to create other humans, they still could not imagine that they would act as they observed other Stellarians and Lunarians acting in the imperfect worlds they were observing. At that time, we didn't see how any human in the universe could act contrary to the universal rules that supported humanity and the most important aspects of being human: free will and individuality. Our creators smiled at us as some of us assured them that, quote, "This kid is not going to mess up the peace and order of the universe. Just you wait and see," unquote. 3. Life seems to be an unfair disadvantage. How are any of us supposed to know the rules of the quote-unquote game if they are stored as energy patterns on an essence that we don't even know exists? How are we supposed to quote-unquote play the game in equality and fairness to all, as the original rules stipulate, if we are unable to remember the rules and there is no one around to teach them to us or enforce them? It doesn't seem fair that so many of us are going to quote-unquote fail at quote-unquote playing the game when our own creators made it impossible for us to know how to play it right. Furthermore, they set up the game so that it would be impossible to play by the rules, which rules would ensure us the peace and happiness they experience in their perfect world. They expected and wanted us to quote-unquote fail so that we would learn from the experience. Therefore, if it was expected of us to quote-unquote play the game improperly, then is it not true reality that we are, in fact, quote-unquote playing the game correctly? It seems confusing. On the other hand, though, we know that there isn't an advanced human being in the universe who is responsible for the creation and development of new human life who isn't completely fair and just in all that they do. So why and how did they set up the quote-unquote game in the first place? And what have they done to help us play it? 4. Giving up sex forever doesn't seem fair. We have learned that there are 3 basic humanity types. 1. Those who want to be served by others. 2. Those who want to serve themselves. And 3. Those who want to serve. We've also learned that only those who have chosen to serve others and be creators will have the ultimate power of creation and the ability to experience the unmatched sensory fulfillment provided by sex. We have learned that, relatively speaking, very, very few of us will ever want to be eternal servants. But because we are all allowed to experience sex in this mortal world, it doesn't sit well with most of us to know that we will be deprived of this incredible power to utilize and fulfill the full potential of all of our human senses. It just doesn't make sense that all of us cannot have this ability, even if we don't choose to be eternal creators of and servants to others. Even though it doesn't make sense, it is still universal human reality. 5. We envied our creators, wanting to be like them in every way. Because our foundationalization process took place around those whom we recognized as our parents and creators, we developed a deep respect for them, whether we chose to be like them or not. The desire to have their qualities and power is a natural effect of being around them for such a long period of time. There isn't a human being in the universe who can honestly say that having the power to control the elements and the ability to experience the benefits of sex forever is not something that a human would consider quote-unquote special. It is something that all of us would love to have. Those who wanted to be served wondered why they just couldn't have the power to create with the simplicity of a thought, instead of having to depend on others to serve them. They sided with those who wanted to serve themselves, who also had the same question. Remember, those who serve themselves, Lunarian, have certain powers and abilities to manipulate their environment by themselves, but are restricted in doing so. They do not have the ability to control the basic components, protons, neutrons, and electrons, that make up all matter. The specific Lunarian powers do not extend beyond the planet on which they reside. Lunarians need advanced technology, automation, and machinery to manipulate their environment according to their desires, whereas Solarians use the power of their thoughts to do anything anywhere in the universe. Stellarians, on the other hand, have Solarians set up and do everything for them. 6. We had an argument with our creators. Our creators explained that only those who wanted to serve others would use the powers associated with creation correctly. Once this was explained, we fully understood the conditions and the restrictions of our free will. The very first argumentative discussion ensued in our perfect world. Quote, how do you, parents/creators, know that just because we do not choose to have children and be responsible for them, we would misuse the power to control the elements? Unquote. 7. Our creators could not explain why we could not be like them. It was futile for our creators to argue with those of us who posed this question. They simply reminded us that we would find out in our next stage of development. They explained to us that only those who chose to be servants would find personal happiness in never violating the rules that govern human equality and peace. As mentioned above, many of us thought that we would never violate the rules while quote-unquote playing the game. Thus ensued the disagreement. Our creators explained that those who serve themselves or want to be served would change the rules to benefit themselves and their own agendas. They would do this not because these humanity types are any better or worse in any way than the service-oriented type, but because the universal rules under which eternal servants operate could never provide Lunarian and Stellarian humans with the happiness they desire. Being responsible for another person's happiness is a time-consuming and sometimes monotonous duty. No part of this type of responsibility would fulfill the desires of the Lunarian and Stellarian humanity types. 8. We could only be convinced through experience. The argument was not settled during our primordial existence. We were not fully convinced and didn't believe our first parents and their opinions any more than we believe our imperfect parents in this world. The only way for us to come to an understanding and become convinced for ourselves was to find out for ourselves. Of course, once placed in an imperfect world, we would not be able to remember the argument. Therefore, this life became the, quote, day of our probation, unquote. We had to prove to ourselves what our creators were saying about us. We had to see firsthand how each of us would personally act when allowed the ability to create and have power over others and dominion over our environment. Would we use it to have others serve us? Would we use it to serve ourselves? Or would we find our greatest sense of peace and happiness in the service of others, doing all that we do for the sake of others? Our probative experience away from the influence of advanced humans would prove that who we are is truly the best for us. 9. Time away from our creators allows us to value our true self. For this mortal probative period, we were given a world where we would be allowed the ability to have sex and have limited power and control over our environment. Here upon the earth, it appears to us, because we have no known interaction with them, that we are unsupervised by those whom we would recognize as ones we should obey and whom we would know have ultimate power and always use it properly. If we could remember our life experience with our creators, there would have been no question that we would live more like we did when we were with them, because we would remember how wonderful it was to live that way. We would know without a doubt that there was an overseer monitoring the use of our free will, who would eventually step in and keep us from violating the rules. We would know that we could be monitored and watched at all times. It's easier to understand this concept by using the example of comparing how employees of equal standing act when their boss is around and monitoring what they are doing with how they act when their boss is gone on vacation for a few weeks and they know they are not being monitored. Would they continue to work with the same integrity, the same motivation, and always in the same emotional state as when their boss is present? It would make sense that the very few, who continue to act the exact same way while their boss is gone as they do while the boss is around, would be considered the most beneficial and productive employees. The others enjoy the aspect of quote-unquote play in the notion, quote, while the cat's away, the mice will play, unquote. Many people do not enjoy their job or their boss, and when there's an opportunity to violate the rules, whether that be from simply taking a longer break than allowed, to extorting money and materials from one's employer and justifying these actions in any way, most will do anything to make their employment seem more tolerable. This example in no way reflects the integrity of a person who is a loyal employee, even though he or she gains little to no happiness in the current employment opportunities to which humans are subjected while in an imperfect world. The example is only used to get a specific point across about our state of mind in the presence of advanced human beings and what our state of mind might be when we are not around them. The point is, we would never act true to our real self if we were aware that our parents slash creators were monitoring our actions. Because the purpose of life in an imperfect world is to prove to ourselves who we really are. Our knowledge of any humans outside of our Earth is restricted. As far as we know for sure, there is no other life form in the universe except that which is found upon the Earth. And if there happens to be, none directly intervenes into our daily lives, as far as we know. 10. There is no such thing as quote-unquote failure. In a situation where we are expected to fail, there can be no real failure. It was not intended for any of us to fail the experience of an imperfect life. How could we fail to fail? It's impossible. The imperfect world was set up to cause us to fail. Therefore, it is not counted as a failure for us. Even if we could fail, our personal measure of failure would determine our personal success. This success is not based on the failure of our actions, but rather on what we learned from it. Our consciousness is the continual effort of our imperfect brain trying to match the energy patterns / levels, or memories, of our essence. When the energy we expend, our actions, thoughts, and experience matches those stored in our essence, we sense a state of peace and equilibrium that we equate to the feelings of joy and happiness. If our actions, thoughts, and experience don't match those that are stored in our essence, then we feel anxious, sad, depressed, angry, lonely, etc. If we can accept our current life as a series of quote-unquote failures, per se, intended to teach us something about ourselves, then we will feel a whole lot better about our situation in an imperfect world. Our overall motivation in life is to feel peace and happiness. Yet again, the overall purpose of an imperfect world is to give us the opportunity to experience the opposite of peace and happiness. Therefore, no matter what we do, we can never fail in this life. We can only learn from the experience. Our experiences in an imperfect world will forever allow us to recognize just how wonderful human existence can be. In the overall eternal picture of things, therefore, we were not created to fail. We were created so that we might have joy. 11. Our quote-unquote failure is the purpose for this life. We are now well into the quote-unquote game of life, circa 2012 upon the planet we call Earth, and near the end of the time allotted for us to quote-unquote play the game. Generally, we can all agree that by our continual failure to find peace and happiness, we, as a group of humans, are succeeding quite well at the real purpose of life, as each of us individually is unable to find continual peace and happiness. We have won the game that all along we thought we were losing. As explained previously, advanced human beings are monitoring our individual experiences as mortals. They intercede at times, unseen and unnoticed, and not how most people would like to believe, in order to ensure not only that the quote-unquote game is played fairly, but that each of us has every opportunity we need to learn for ourselves. And what do we need to learn? That indeed it would be foolish to allow us to have the abilities of a powerful human creator. For this reason, we each live various lives while going through the time frame allotted to quote unquote play the game. At the end of quote unquote the game, all of those who questioned our creators in the first place will see for themselves exactly why their parents slash creators were right. 12. Many lifetimes are needed to help us understand ourselves. Most of us will be given the opportunity to live many times during our mortality in an imperfect world. During each lifetime, we will be placed where we need to be to help us gain proper experience and understanding about who we have chosen to be. We will be female in some lives, male in others, born into wealth in some, poverty-stricken in others, dark-skinned in some, light-skinned in others, allowed physical beauty and strength in some, homeliness, deformities, and physical disabilities in others. Although sometimes the placement of our essence into a particular body is random, as most people can learn from the same experiences, the advanced beings who monitor our essences will always make sure that what each of us needs to prove our humanity is accommodated. If we are prejudiced against dark-skinned people in one life, we may, for example, come back as a dark-skinned person. If we believe males are the more capable gender, we may come back as a woman. If we believe that people should respect and honor their own family, culture, and traditions, and maintain a patriotic concern for their own country, we may be born into a third world country ripe with unrest and tyranny. If we have any propensity or feeling that we are better than another in any way, we may come back into a life where we will have the opportunity to experience life in the shoes of those we have judged as inferior to us. If we condemn the murderer, the thief, the terrorist, the rapist, the pedophile, the drug user, the prostitute, or the mentally or physically challenged, we may be put into similar circumstances and environments that led our equally eternal siblings to use their free agency to commit what we judge to be atrocious crimes and behavior. And it can be guaranteed that most of us will do what they did if placed in similar circumstances. There might be some wisdom in the often quoted, but hardly ever heeded counsel, quote, "Judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." Unquote. King James Bible, Matthew 7, 1-2. 13. Any action that does not support and respect free will is a misuse of our free will. Keep in mind that we are meant to fail in life, and by our failures or the experience of unhappiness, we learn more about ourselves. Remember the argument, quote, "How do you, parents/creators, know just because we do not choose to have children and be responsible for them, that we would misuse the power to control the elements?" Unquote. Part of the responsibility in controlling the elements that create the environments in which human beings exist is that everything is always done in equality and for the sake of others. Free agency is always encouraged and protected by those who control the universe. Any thought, any action, any expenditure of energy that is not used to support this equality and free agency is a misuse of power. Most people judge others or condemn others for exercising their own free agency. When we form a personal opinion of somebody, or something that others might do with their free will, is this not an expenditure of our energy through thought and consideration? And when our judgment does not support the ability of another to exercise their free will as they desire, as long as their free will does not impede the free will of another, is this not a misuse of power? There are but few humans in an imperfect world who do not find a need in the pursuit of their own happiness to violate the free agency of another in some way. In so doing, they justify the misuse of power. 14. The wealthy misuse free will. For just one example of many, consider this. Imagine a person is rich in material goods in this world and judges the poor as irresponsible or quote-unquote second class. This person also does not do all that he or she can to ensure that all others have equal opportunities to have the material goods that he or she has, if they so desire. Therefore, in this scenario, this person demonstrates the misuse of power. These are those who subject others to be their servants and who desire that others serve their needs in their businesses and corporations. These are those who seek financial security and wealth by the sweat of another's brow and not by their own. This means that others do the bulk of the physical labor while they benefit thereby without laboring for that which they earn. Although some of these might argue that they were once poor and worked hard to get to the position of authority and power over those who work for them, they cannot deny that being poor and serving others made them unhappy. For this reason, they desired to become rich. If laboring for another makes a person unhappy, and that person desires to become wealthy and powerful so that they will not have to work hard anymore, is that not evidence of the humanity type that fits a person who wants others to serve them? Solarian. When the whole idea of wealth and success revolves around having others exist in a position of servitude to support this wealth and success, are the humanity types who desire these things not creating inequality and therefore demonstrating a misuse of power? 15. Nothing wrong with the desire to be wealthy. In our Creator's eyes, however, there is absolutely nothing wrong with a person wanting to become rich and having others serve them. Why would there be? We were given the opportunity during our foundationalization process to make the choice to be served, having an irrevocable guarantee to be able to have this choice fulfilled in every way. However, those who chose this humanity type, Solarian, cannot have the power of a creator, and their quote-unquote success in an imperfect world, in failing to support equality and free agency for all people, when they had the chance to wield power and authority over others, will prove the point to them. Again, there are advanced beings who monitor the mortal lives of those going through their second stage of development. They will ensure that during one of their mortal lives, those who are of the Solarian humanity type will be put in a position of wealth and authority over others, if not by their own choice and hard work, then by birth into a wealthy and quote-unquote successful family. And when they are experiencing wealth and power over others, and finding a sense of happiness in doing this, these people can rest assured that they will never be granted the powers and abilities of human creators. No employer, for example, who gains personal happiness from the labors that others perform for them, no matter how much money they pay their employees in an effort to justify that it is okay that others serve their needs, will ever be allowed the power of a human creator. 16. We can do no wrong in an imperfect world. The same can be presented in thousands of scenarios of human experience in our imperfect world. If we find any justification or sense of joy in forming a personal opinion about somebody, judging another, who has free will equal to our own, we are misusing the power of free will. Anytime we put our own needs above those of another, if it is within our control to provide equally for both, we are misusing the power. From the moment we were left to ourselves in this imperfect world, without the ability to recall our associations with advanced humans, we began to take control of our environment. We used the power of our free agency to satisfy the inner longings of our subconscious by expending our energy in pursuit of balance between our conscious brain and our essence. We pursue our individual happiness. The conflict and misery associated with human nature ensues because the vast majority of us can only find our balance in serving ourselves or being served by others. Thus, it can be properly said that a world with all of its injustices, atrocities, and misery is indeed a perfect world for the intended purpose of its creation. It can also be said that those responsible for these injustices, atrocities, and miseries are doing no wrong. They are merely searching for and finding their personal balance. 17. Whatever makes us happy is right for us. How can any of us judge a wealthy person who has many servants and slaves to be doing wrong when that person chose the humanity type of the one who wants to be served by others? In an imperfect world, they may appear to be doing the wrong thing. But when they were foundationalized in a perfect world, they were doing the right thing, because they were granted the ability by their creators to choose to have others serve them. However, because it will have been proven that their choice of action causes inequality, before they get their perfect body, they must be convinced why they cannot be trusted with the power and abilities granted to a human creator. Their actions in this imperfect world, or better, their individual pursuits of happiness here upon this earth, will provide the appropriate probative experience for them. It will be proven that their parents/creators were right. Only those who find their happiness in serving others can be trusted with the power that will maintain equality and peace among free-willed beings. When those who desire wealth and success for themselves and their families live once again in their perfect world, they will have their servants, whether free-willed Solarians or programmed, advanced, android-like humans, who will serve them forever. And they will always remember that in pursuit of their own chosen happiness, they created injustices, atrocities, and miseries for others. They will be completely satisfied, i.e., happy, with their Solarian status in the universe and never desire the power of a creator. 18. Solarian types do not need many lives. Unlike the majority of people who have chosen to be served by others or serve themselves, Solarian humanity types, those who made the choice to be servants, are not required to have many mortal lives. They have nothing to prove to themselves. They weren't involved in the argument centered on why only Solarians, they, could have quote-unquote special powers and abilities. Most of their lives involve coming into an imperfect world as children who have short lives ended because of the choices of other humanity types. Whether they die because of hunger, disease, or physical abuse or trauma, the advanced human monitors place Solarian essences in bodies they know will not last long in an imperfect world. The people who kill the children, whether directly through war and carnage, or indirectly through poverty and neglect, need the experience of seeing children die and suffer because of the free will choices they make. This will prove to them that their need to be served or to serve themselves has the potential of causing others misery and sorrow. Solarian servants made the choice to quote-unquote serve others in the capacity of martyrs so that others could learn from the experience. Well can it be surmised that there are but few, very, very few, human beings upon this earth who have not used another for their own gain. And again, when we use another to make ourselves happy, we fall into the category of desiring that others serve us in some capacity, or that we serve ourselves without concern for the plight of another. Those who are true Solarian humanity types find little balance in an imperfect world. They find no happiness in the reality that another has to be unequal to them so that they can find happiness, because they can only find happiness in attempting to serve others for the sake of others. They cannot bear to have anyone suffer in any way to support their own happiness, and they continually find themselves so concerned about the plight of others that their own lives are lost. However, the imperfect life is not about them. It is always about others. For this reason, most only find their essences used for the bodies of children as explained above, and some for the sake of creating the opportunity for others to know and understand the true reality of who they are and why they exist. 19. Our chosen overseer needs only one mortal lifetime. We discussed the necessity of one of the children assigned to each solar system to become the predestined overseer of the rest. Because this human being had no choice in his upbringing, and the rest of us realized that because of this, he will never misuse his power and abilities, he has no need to participate in an imperfect world, except but once. He must be placed in an imperfect world for two main purposes. 20. An overseer never misuses his power under any circumstance. The first purpose is to prove to the rest of us that he was indeed foundationalized correctly for what he was intended to do. We must know that he will always support the universal laws of humanity and never do anything contrary to these laws, no matter what consequences he is forced to face personally. How could any of us accept such complete authority and control over our solar system, even over our individual free agency, if the one who was placed in a position of control over us didn't have to go through what we did. We could question, quote, how do we know for sure that our overseer wouldn't have misused his power as we did if he were placed in similar circumstances? Unquote. We have no need to prove to ourselves if any other of our siblings who chose to be Solarian can be trusted with the power of creation, because they are not our overseer. They will have an overseer watching over their actions just like the rest of us. 21. We need an overseer to supervise the way we use our free will. Another reason why the overseer came to this imperfect world was to prove to those who are not destined to be creators that even if there was one among them to teach them the proper rules of quote-unquote the game, they would reject him. The people of the world would be shown that even if there was one upon earth who revealed all the truths of the universe, which imperfect humans cannot remember on their own, this one would still be rejected. Because universal truth mandates total equality in all things and profound respect of individuality and free will, anyone who teaches these universal truths would be perceived as a threat to the free will of those who want others to serve them. It must be proven to us why an overseer is needed. We must unconditionally, without being forced, accept that this overseer has the right to exercise extraordinary power in supervision of our free agency, subjecting all of us to his supreme authority. While in an imperfect world, an overseer will never improperly exercise his power and authority over others, but will teach the simple truths that establish and promote peace and happiness for all people equally, thus giving us the chance to accept these truths without being forced. Because he in his message is usually always spurned and rejected by the majority, we will begin to understand why an overseer must use force in limiting the use of our free agency to fulfill the mandates of universal human law. Again, we succeeded just fine according to the premise of our imperfect world by failing to recognize this overseer for who he was and to accept the simplicity of his message. If we cannot learn by ourselves to abide by the terms of our humanity, then we will be forced to choose to comply or terminate our existence as a human being. Moreover, because of our experience in condemning and rejecting our own overseer and his servants when given the opportunity, without them disclosing their true identity, we will finally be more willing to accept the necessary conditions that control our free will. 22. Quasi-overseers are sent to help us learn. There is always only one overseer per solar system. Who he is and the reason for his existence have been explained previously. None of us will have the excuse that, quote, I would have surely accepted the overseer and his message had I heard about it during one of my lifetimes in the imperfect world. Therefore, how do you creators/parents know that I wouldn't have if I didn't have the opportunity to hear him or his message? Unquote. Rest assured, our creators have taken all of our excuses into consideration. Because it is contrary to the very nature of our free agency to be controlled by another, it was necessary to see what would happen if we were given the chance to accept the universal laws of humanity without being forced to accept them. Other Solarian servants from our batch of children are chosen to live in mortality at various times in our imperfect world to ensure that all of us have the opportunity during at least one of our lifetimes to learn the appropriate rules and hear the same message of peace and equality supported by our overseer. Each of the quasi-overseers comes at a certain stage of human development in our imperfect world, being placed strategically throughout the world in many different isolated human cultures. In all of these situations, though, there has always been only one who is prepared and given the permission by our creators to teach the people. This is to give us the experience of listening to the counsel of just one, instead of the possibility of the confusion that would occur if more than one free-willed person were assigned to teach the people in their own way. There are not many of these quasi-overseers needed for any one world. They can come back in many lifetimes and do the same thing they did in a previous life, which is to teach the people the message of real truth and the proper way to live with each other. These others were and are treated the exact same way as the overseer was in his one lifetime experience. They were and are spurned, and their message was and is rejected by the majority of imperfect humans. For the same reasons, imperfect humans rejected their own overseer. 23. We cannot deceive ourselves into thinking we can be trusted. Each time these true messengers are rejected by the people, we are further convinced why it is necessary that our free will is curtailed and monitored by someone besides ourselves. No matter how good our intentions, no matter how much control we think we have over our own thoughts and actions, the fact that we have free will makes us all susceptible to the possibility of misusing our free agency to take away that of another. Many of us will go through some of our lives convinced that we have done nothing to harm another or impede equality and the ability of another to exercise their free will as we exercised our own. It is not until all things are fully revealed and understood that we will know for sure if our chosen lifestyle and actions did indeed do no harm. Most of us have very little concern for anyone outside of ourselves and those whom we choose to value with our quote-unquote love. Those who concentrate all of their energy on their own family unit will never be immune from the possibility that their self and family-centered actions have not caused another person an unequal situation in life. All we have to do is trace the ripple effect of any one of our actions back to its original source, and we will be surprised about the many injustices caused to others because of that one action. For example, 24. Our actions unknowingly cause inequality. More than likely, the reader of this book is reading these words via some source of written communication, either from a book, a printed page, or from a computer screen. It takes basic natural resources from the earth to make the products or produce the apparatus upon which the reader is reading these words, i.e., paper and ink, or computer components. If the reader were to patiently dissect the means of receiving this information, one would find that someone, or many, along the way of production was taken advantage of and treated far less than equal to the reader. In an imperfect world, matter does not materialize out of nowhere. The basic materials of all things come from some source provided by the earth. These resources must be gathered and processed into the parts of the things we use in our daily lives. There is no doubt that those who begin the process of gathering the materials from the earth needed for the product and those who produce the product are treated much differently than he or she who uses the product. If we gain some sort of happiness and enjoyment from the use of any product, and we do not produce it ourselves from start to finish, then we are indirectly misusing the expenditure of our energy to create inequality for someone else. Again, in an imperfect world, it is almost impossible to avoid creating inequality. A field worker, for example, will never be granted the same importance as a medical doctor, although the medical doctor needs the field worker to pick his food just as much as the field worker needs the doctor to reset a broken limb. However, if the doctor does not want to misuse his free agency to create inequality, he or she should be anxiously engaged in trying to create equality between the medical profession and the field workers. Why don't they both receive the same pay? 25. Forgiveness is the essential nature of creators. We do not always know what we do in this life that causes others to suffer. Therefore, we will never be condemned by our creators for following the true feelings of our desires and seeking to be served or for serving ourselves. Advanced humans created us and are responsible for us as the free-willed beings who turned out this way. It is their responsibility to make sure we have the environment necessary so that we can generate the experiences that will satisfy who we are. From the most extreme mass murderer to the little old lady who judges the actions of her annoying neighbor, none will be made to suffer for following the dictates of his or her own conscience. What they will learn from their experience, however, is that they have chosen a course in life that confirms that they will never become like their creators/parents and share in their unique powers and abilities. 26. Imperfect family units destroy equality and isolate us from others. One of the first things we did to create inequality in pursuing our own happiness in an imperfect world was to create the family unit. Family units cause us to separate and isolate ourselves from others. Not knowing any better and motivated by the intense desire to have sex, males and females have their own children. In so doing, they feel a bond of attachment associated with those for whom they are responsible. Whatever it takes to support this family unit, even at the expense of others or their natural environment. Imperfect humans are sure to expend their energy in the support and protection of their own family. There wouldn't be any problem if the environment always provided equally for each family unit. But the environment of an imperfect world is not set up to provide for everyone equally. Its natural resources are limited, causing each family to protect what it needs in order to survive. 27. Our imperfect world is centered around money. Before long, establishing bordered homes, communities, cities, nations, and countries, and killing others to protect one's own family became a justifiable and reasonable expenditure of energy. But still, always a misuse of power. When the human race spread throughout the world and the families it had formed took power and control over the limited natural resources of the earth, we had to find an appropriate way to place values on these resources. Therefore, we created money. The introduction of money began to control every aspect of our expenditure of energy. Every waking thought and action has something to do with making enough money to support our families or ourselves. The concept of money introduced designated values for everything in our world. Along with the values we place on the material things of the world, we began to place values on each other according to what we owned and how well we earned and managed our money. The quote-unquote game of life became a game about money, how it is earned, how it is managed, and how it affects our daily lives. We have set up a world in which it is impossible to live without money. There are those of us who know how to play the game of money so well that even if everyone in the world were given $1 million, the few who know and play the game well would have the millions belonging to others in their own pockets in a matter of just a few weeks. 28. Money cannot buy happiness. No matter how wealthy a person is, and no matter how much control and power one might have over others, finding continued happiness in an imperfect world seems impossible. It seems impossible because it is. No matter how hard we try, unless we have a perfect body in a perfect environment, we will never be able to match the experiences that are foundationalized in our subconscious essence. Emotional turmoil is the bane of our mortal existence. From the negative emotional situations that arise in an imperfect world, a wide variety of mental illnesses add to our mortal experience. Well can it be said that we are all mentally ill. 29. We are all insane. Therefore, none of us are. Let's take, for example, a man who walks down the street talking to himself. In his mind, a conversation is taking place between his conscious mind and something that appears to him to be coming from outside of his head. We judge this man to be, quote-unquote, insane. Yet, the majority of people, if honest, would admit that they have had conversations in their own heads. Most believe that they can communicate with unseen forces outside of themselves and therefore expend their energy, create the experience, attempting to communicate with something or someone who is not actually there. Because it takes place in the privacy of one's own intimate surroundings, instead of out in public, it is considered to be a quote-unquote sane and appropriate thing to do. But is it? How can the very same experience, that of having a conversation with someone or something that others cannot see, be quote-unquote sane in one instance and quote-unquote insane in another? It just doesn't make sense. And it certainly is not being fair and equal to those judged to be quote-unquote insane. Therefore, any of us who judge another person as being insane because he or she is not afraid to carry on intimate conversations with unseen entities outside of themselves in public, misuse the power that should maintain equality. The fact is, we are all equally insane. We all have imperfect bodies in an imperfect world. 30. Looking to others to lead us causes inequality. Many of our societal problems can be traced to those who believe an outside source communicates with them and tells them what to do and what to tell others to do. Throughout our history, great masses of free-willed humans have been placed under the influence of charismatic leaders who have effectively convinced the people that their quote-unquote mental illness is not a mental illness at all, but a divinely directed mandate given by the progenitor of the thoughts that come to them. These human leaders misuse power because they literally take away the free will of others and replace it with their own. Keep in mind, during our foundationalization process, not one of our creators told any of us, except for the one to be the overseer, what to think or how to act. We were taught to become our own individual self, not the product of another's experience, but that of our own. But because we cannot remember these foundational experiences, we have become confused by our situation in an imperfect world and make ourselves susceptible to someone outside of ourselves telling us who we are and why we exist. We look to a leader or someone who we think knows more than us about us to guide us. Many of these leaders and their groups have come and gone throughout our history, and many still exist today. Yet none of them has ever been able to speak to all of humanity equally. None of them has been able to speak to our common sense and convince all of us that what they say is true for everyone. And if what a leader teaches is not true for everyone equally, it is a misuse of power and creates inequality. 31. Inequality is created by those who believe they are special. There are many people who believe they have tapped into some cosmic force outside of their own body and that this force is available to all people equally. They claim that they have found the secret to retrieving this force and using it for their own purposes. To protect their integrity and keep the rest of us from referring to them as quote-unquote insane, they explain that the quote-unquote force is available to all of us equally, but that only a few of us are more quote-unquote gifted in the ability to access it more readily than others. In stating this, they are insinuating that we are not all equal because the majority of us cannot, quote-unquote, tap into this cosmic force that only they understand and can, quote-unquote, tap into. Not one of these individuals has ever spoken to all of us equally and made complete sense out of our own inner longings and feelings, which, more often than not, completely disagree with what their, quote-unquote, cosmic force tells them. To create value for themselves, and to be compensated for this value, they write books, give seminars, and do anything else that will draw the free will of another to their own ways. They misuse the power because the solutions that they present are not universally agreeable to all people equally. In other words, their beliefs do not work for everybody. Therefore, they are far from the real truth. 32. Quote-unquote special ones can be cured like any other mentally ill person. The same treatments we currently use to treat those whom we consider to be mentally ill can be used on those who believe they are somehow receiving outside communication. If antipsychotic drugs were administered to those who make a claim of quote-unquote inspiration from outside of their own head, the delusional process by which they formulate their thoughts would abruptly end. Likewise, if a person making such a claim suffered physical damage to their brain, either from trauma or from natural deterioration of the brain tissue, the delusion of grandeur would also stop. Current scientists have developed these drugs to treat those whom they consider to be quote-unquote insane. But if seemingly quote-unquote sane people were to use the same drugs, they would likewise react the same way, and all communication within one's own head or from what appears to be coming from without, from the cosmos, would stop. 33. The feeling of being quote-unquote special comes from our essence. The reason why so many of us believe that we receive communication from beyond our own brain is because of our lack of understanding of how our essence functions. This has been explained in the preceding chapters of this book. All mental illnesses can be traced to our inability to properly balance the energy of our current experience with the patterns of energy established and subtly felt from our essence. This includes schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and psychotic, eating, and anxiety disorders, to name just a few. It also includes those illnesses that are not categorized as those of one who is quote-unquote insane, such as depression, fear, anxiety, insecurity, and being quote-unquote in love. The communications that go on inside of our heads, and which often appear to be coming from another source outside of us, are simply our imperfect brain being affected by the energy emissions of our essence. As explained previously, some of our brains are constructed differently than others, therefore allowing some of us to utilize the essence differently than others. We have discussed how this occurs in those whom we have labeled, quote-unquote, mentally challenged, such as savants and autistic people. And since many of us remain unconvinced that we alone are responsible for all of our thoughts and quote-unquote in-head communications, we cannot very well label others quote-unquote insane when many of us show the same characteristics. 34. Those who seek for acceptance of others want to be served. Again, it is in an effort to have others serve us by honoring and respecting us that our humanity type is demonstrated. Those who set up followings of people whom they have convinced to listen to their views and understanding of life are merely seeking respect and honor from others. When they receive this respect and honor, they are being served by others. Those who pursue courses in life that make them famous and well-liked are also trying desperately to find those who will serve their needs. Most people, however, do not need others' accolades and praises to find their own happiness, but they do need privacy and equality of resources to be able to pursue what makes them happy, distinct and unique individuals. In all of our pursuits in life, none of us can be faulted for trying to achieve our own individual happiness, no matter what type of happiness that might be. Summary. The quote-unquote game of life in the imperfect world is set up so that we will fail in our efforts. But in our failure, we will have succeeded in solving our primordial argument with our parents/creators. Quote, how do you, parents/creators, know that just because we do not choose to have children and be responsible for them, we would misuse the power to control the elements? Unquote. After going through mortality during our second stage of human development, we will know. With this understanding, we will be ready to accept the fact that we will never be able to experience sex again, nor will we be given the power to control the elements. We will be more than willing to accept the way things are in the universe, the way things have always been, and the way things will always be in the future. Real truth in worlds without end.